and together with Rebecca Feinstein next to me and Santi, you have just seen, we have a core team from EASA managing the European Union CCCA CORSIA project. So a project that has been initiated and funded by the European Union that tries to support all Asian nations in close cooperation with and among each other to reduce CO2 emissions and the impact of climate change in civil aviation. We are moving on and we're welcoming you to the first session of the follow-up webinars today. And it is going to be about benefits of SAF beyond CORSIA. That's probably a name, a title that triggers some questions. And we're looking forward to see Africa trying to help us understanding better what SAF could mean and be beyond simply being part of the CORSIA scheme. If I may just briefly try to get back to the project we are doing. As I mentioned before, we are working with all Asian nations, and the main objectives are CORSIA implementation support to the state action plan for CO2 reporting, and we are trying to provide support on the establishment of data management systems and climate change policies. The same goes, and at the moment, I must say I'm struggling a bit. Again, we have lots of technical issues today because I have windows popping up in front of my screen so that I can see my own presentation. Now I'm back. And the same goes for the area of action, which is pretty similar. So CORSIA implementation, state action plan, support aviation emission data management systems implementation, and support on climate change policies. Now you see the three of us again here in the slide, Santi as a project manager, myself as operational manager, Rebecca next to me as well. And whenever you have a question, please feel free to do so through the Slido application that you see on the bottom right corner of your screen. Here you can access it also through the QR code. Rebecca, please.
If this doesn't work for technical problems we are facing today, just use the chat function. We are looking at both applications.
Exactly. So be free to choose. We are monitoring it in parallel, and whenever there's a moment when Africa is available, we post these questions in between or later. The access code here, apart from the QR code, is Juliet Hotel Oscar Bravo X-Ray Golf. Juliet Hotel Oscar Bravo X-Ray Golf. So now, benefits of SAF beyond CORSIA. Our speaker today, Africa. Again, thanks for joining. And some of you, many of you might have seen Africa already in January this year. She was, I think, on the second panel on the second day. And Africa is a long-term company for the team. She's a senior environmental CORSIA carbon market expert in EASA project in multiple projects. She's the head of sustainable aviation at Vertis in environmental finance, and I think you're calling in from Madrid, right? From Spain at the moment. And you're advising aviation stakeholders on environmental issues and managing carbon compliance and hedging needs. So formally engaged as a legal advisor, also within the Spanish Civil Aviation Authority. So a long, solid background, and I'm looking very much to have, again, the opportunity to be with you. And again, this project we're doing here lives from collaboration, cooperation, and your participation in itself is already a gift to us. And because without you, we couldn't manage these kind of initiatives. Now, Africa. The floor is all yours, ready to go. I hope we are not struggling with the technical issues again, but let's look forward and continue. It's all yours, Africa. Do you want me to share the presentation, or are you able to do it yourself? Okay, then I will do
it yourself because I didn't have time yet.
Okay, good. Fine, no worries. Just a second.
The password that I received was not working, but now we
all right.
We found the problem.
We're flexible. Okay,
I'm here, but I will prefer if it is you sharing the presentation.
Not a problem. So do you see it now?
Yeah. And
okay.
Can you hear me well?
Africa, you just tell me when to move on, okay?
And can you hear me well? Okay. So thank you, Ralph and Santi, for the introduction. Yes, as you said, the objective today is to look into how SAF can be used and claimed by other entities out of the aviation sector. When I mean out of the aviation sector, they have part of the carbon footprint from the aviation sector, but I mean it's not the airline, the company that will be claiming the use. As you know, ICAO has been working a lot to ensure that SAF will be a benefit when it comes to its use in CORSIA. But, well, as you know, things have changed in terms of, well, we had the COVID, offsetting requirements will be delayed, and CORSIA might not be like the principal driver for airlines to get into SAF. We will look into this in detail through the slides. But the objective today is to explain you, or that you have a general idea and understand the concept on how other entities like corporates are getting into the picture of scaling up SAF because they fully believe of the benefits of this measure towards the decarbonization of the sector. So if you go to the first slide, just as an introduction, well, nobody doubts about the benefits of using SAF to decarbonize the aviation sector and to reduce emissions. You know that looking from an overall life cycle footprint, SAF can reduce emissions even higher than 90% compared to fossil jet fuel. And that's why SAF was already from 2010, when industry and ICAO agreed on the carbon neutral growth objective from 2020, when they consider SAF as a key element within the market, the basket of measures that the industry will have to achieve that goal. Also, in the latest assemblies from ICAO, you all know that assembly has been recognizing the role of SAF to reduce emissions from the aviation sector, and that a lot of work has been done from ICAO in terms of sustainability criteria, life cycle assessment analysis. So a lot is going on. And even if you look now at the work that ICAO is doing in terms of the long-term aspirational goal, there is the report, and you can clearly see what the key role from drop-in fuels will be towards decarbonizations to 2050. Here, when I talk about drop-in fuels, I'm referring to not only sustainable aviation fuels, but also low-carbon aviation fuels. You know that difference within the framework of CORSIA, but among them, it's clear that the benefits from the use from sustainable aviation fuels will be key. So nobody has any doubt that it's like the most promising measure to decarbonize emissions from the aviation sector in the near and mid-term. In the future, we will see other measures coming in place, like hydrogen, but right now everyone is looking at SAF as the most promising way. But beyond all these benefits that are not the key part of this conference, there are other virtual coffee SAF events where other colleagues have been talking about the benefits from an environmental point of view from SAF. So we all know these benefits, but there is also a problem. Everyone knows that right now SAF is not competitive in comparison to conventional fuel. There is a problem in terms of cost. Cost is very high because there is not a clear demand signal. So as long as demand increases and production increases, it is expected that the SAF cost will be reduced, and therefore it will be easier for airlines to go into this measure to reduce emissions. So there is a general understanding that there is the need for these market signals, that we need demand. And I'm sure that we all know that regulations, policies are needed. Everyone is putting the eyes into policymakers and regulators to really help the scale up of this SAF. There are plenty of initiatives and policies that are not also part of the conference of the workshop today. You have heard about in Europe, for example, about the EU refuel proposal to make mandates to help the development and scale up of SAF. There are other policies in other countries. And when you look also into these policy and regulations, we have to look first into these market-based measures that, Ralph, if you move on. that we talk about during that event that you mentioned already in January, when I explained like the benefits from users of SAF more from the airline perspective, because there are market-based measures, as you know, as the European Trading Scheme and CORSIA, where there is a cost put into the emissions because they pretend to incentivize airlines to reduce emissions themselves. So these market-based mechanisms have been built up in a way to somehow help airlines to reduce their payment obligations, either if it's through the payment of carbon allowances, as it happens in the EU ETS, or through the purchase and cancellation of carbon offsets. Both have a cost in the carbon market, but these mechanisms allows for the airlines to reduce these payments obligations if they use SAF. So, for example, in CORSIA, you know that if submitting a specific CORSIA eligible fuels report to the emissions report, and as long as this fuel complies with the CORSIA sustainability criteria, and also if they demonstrate that these fuels come from sustainability certification schemes, they come from producers that have been certified by these schemes, they can claim the use of SAF and therefore reduce their offsetting obligations. We talk about this in January, but what happens is still there is no strong price signal for airlines to go into this. Then the motivation for airlines to use SAF instead of carbon offsets in CORSIA or in the EU ETS will be mainly driven by the price gap between the fossil fuel and the emissions that they have to pay under these schemes. And because in addition to this, we already mentioned that with CORSIA, there will be a delay on the offsetting requirements, because as you know, in CORSIA, the sector will be addressing emissions from flights between participating countries as long as they are above the baseline. And previously, the baseline was intended to be the average of 19 and 20 levels, but because of the COVID, the CAO Council decided to change and just to rely on 2019 emissions for at least the first 3 years of the scheme. On the right side of the slide, I just captured a screenshot from the analysis that were presented to the CAO Council session, the 225th, that if I remember well, it was in March, where the CAEB has been analyzing what the impact of the COVID and what the impact will be, either if relying on the 2019 baseline or returning to the average of 1920 from 2024, will be in terms of actual offsetting requirements, both in volume, accumulated volume from the time it starts, but also in terms of when these offsetting requirements start. Because even though from 2021 airlines are reporting emissions as having offsetting requirements, because we are still below this 2019 baseline, there are no actual offsetting requirements. So this can also mean a delay on the willingness from airlines to go into SAF to reduce their offsetting requirements, because if there are no offsetting requirements, why using SAF to reduce these offsetting requirements? So beyond these compliance, let's say, motivations because of these carbon-based measures, you know that airlines are interested in going into SAF because of other reasons. It can also be because they can reduce their airport charges. There are some initiatives in EU where airlines can get some kind of incentives if committing to uptake SAF. This happens, for example, in the Netherlands or in Sweden, but also because they feel committed with the customer, and there are more and more passengers that are asking their airlines to get into SAF. So this has like a benefit towards the corporate responsibility and the commitment they have towards their customer. And this is also purely related with marketing. Each airline that is using SAF, they make use of this, of course, as they have to do through their marketing strategy. But this, again, it's if we look into SAF from an airline perspective, being the airline the beneficiary from the use of that SAF. Why? Because paying for that gap and the gap premium between the SAF and the conventional fuel. So if you move on. And now it's to talk about the topic of the workshop. The other slides were just an introduction for you to differ. Now it's when corporates out of the aviation sector, so we are not referring here now as airlines, can be key in this picture. Willingness from corporates to reduce their scope 3 emissions is increasing. We will see in another slide what the scopes mean for a corporate. But it's true that this is becoming more and more frequent, that you see corporates that are not airlines, but because they use a lot aviation services, either for their employees or because of cargo, that they are getting more interested in being part of the decarbonization of the sector through the use of SAF. They have been used on using other measures, such as carbon offsetting, which is always good as long as you are using trustful offset programs. But they want to do more, and because they know this cost problem, they want to unlock by bringing new revenue to the investment of SAF. So this happens with companies, for example, like Deloitte. They published a report where they say that when looking into the CO2 footprint from their employees and scope 3 emissions, it is nearly 50% of the overall emissions. So it is understandable that they want to be key and they want to help the sector and they want to reduce these emissions through the use of SAF. Also, why? Because SAF is seen as an in-sector measure. And here I have put the logo from two initiatives that it's important that you keep an eye, because there are several initiatives that are looking into how to facilitate these corporates to be part of this story and to claim the benefits from the use of SAF, even though they will be not burning that SAF itself because they don't have the aircrafts. And one example is the World Economic Forum, Clean Skies for Tomorrow. They are looking for frameworks suggesting for the creation, we will look into this in more detail later, like a creation of a virtual SAF certificate that could help this claim from corporates if getting into investment in SAF to claim towards their scope 3 emissions. And what it's also getting more and more relevant and important now, and I'm sure that many of you attending this conference have heard about the science-based target initiative, that they are helping corporates to commit to targets that take into account the science that is required to limit the global warming to less to the 2 degrees pre-industrial levels. Here in these science-based targets, they don't allow, for example, for the use of offsets. They are asking corporates to reduce, to set targets and to reduce themselves emissions. And SAF has been allowed or considered as one of the in-sector measures that can be used towards the setting up of these targets and to reduce emissions towards scope 3. So in order to, if you move on, Ralph.
I will do that, Africa. Africa, we were continuing solving some technical issues while we were flying. So Slido should be working, as we have already received the first question, and I want to encourage everybody to do so as well. Africa, you want to have questions in between or later on?
Later on.
Okay, good.
And also just for you, for example, for that question, I don't know, there might be some questions that other like companies or colleagues more involved in fuel production can know about cost. I'm not aware of what the cost will be, but we will discuss about this.
All right. Good.
Okay.
Sorry for
and what I know about cost.
Okay.
Okay. So I've been talking about this scope 3. You have to know that when looking into what is the emissions footprint from a corporate in terms of what are all the greenhouse gas emissions that are released to the atmosphere as a result of all the activities performed by that company, you have to rely on the most common known accounting method, which is the greenhouse gas emissions protocol. So this protocol divides the emissions in 3 scopes. So if you look into a corporate, scope 1 will be the direct emissions from the own or control sources, like their own buildings and their own cars, for example. Scope 2 will be the indirect emissions from the generation of the electricity that they purchase, steam, heating, and cooling. So these are indirect emissions. They don't come from their own sources, from their own fuel combustion. And then scope 3 refers to all other indirect emissions that occur in the overall value chain. So here in this scope 3, you see that I have included an aircraft. If you look into what are these indirect emissions, for many corporates, it's huge when it comes to travel business and to the use of aviation services when it comes, for example, in terms of transportation of distribution. And if you look into this from an airline perspective, for example, emissions from combustion of the fuel in an aircraft will be scope 1. So you clearly see how the protocol distributes or allocates the responsibility of the same emissions between several corporates in different scopes. So this is something that has to be also clear. And if you move on, one thing to say, many companies and corporates have been looking in how to monitor and report and target reduction emissions from scope 1 and 2. Doing it through scope 3, it's more challenging. Why? Because you need data that you don't control. So this is something that is getting more and more frequent now, but in the past, most of the corporates have been only being focused on 1 and 2 scopes and not 3. So again, when looking into scope 3 of a corporate related to aviation emissions, we see like 2 categories, as I said before. One is the emissions related to the transportation and distribution of goods of that company, as long as it's used by air. And this includes both upstream and downstream. Upstream will be the emissions from the transportation and distribution of the goods that the company, for example, buys and purchases, and from the transportation and distribution services, whereas downstream will relate to emissions that come from the transportation and distribution from goods that they sell. But in both are emissions related to the transportation and distribution. So these are not scope 1, these are not scope 3, but are scope 2, sorry, but are scope 3 from this corporate. And the other category, because under the greenhouse gas protocol, these are categorized as if I remember well, it was a category 4 and 9. So within each scope, you have like other detailed categories. So this falls under this scope 3 category 4 and 9. Whereas business travel, if I remember well, belongs to category 6 under the greenhouse gas protocol. And this relates to the emissions and the carbon footprint from the traveling involved from employees, as long if we are looking into aviation emissions, as long as this traveling is performed by an aircraft and by an airline. So, as I said before, companies with a large percentage of emissions that are allocated to this scope 3, as I mentioned, as it can happen with consulting and financial professional services, as Deloitte, might prioritize scope 3 even beyond others. And if you look, for example, into the Science-Based Target Initiative guidance, they require organizations with more than 40% of this emissions footprint in scope 3 to at least cover 2/3 of this. So that's why for those where scope 3 emissions are relevant and especially related to aviation emissions is where SAF can play an important role. And that's why there are so many initiatives looking into this. And why? Because there is the recognition that because these corporates will be willing to claim the benefits, but because they pay, there should be any way of accounting and manner to recognize this claiming. Because at the end, the company that is buying and it's covering a price gap to claim the environmental benefits will be the one willing to claim the benefits. And these are the initiatives that I mentioned before that are looking into it. If you move on, Ralph. And also, when looking into these emissions, either if they are related to transport and distribution or if they are related to business travel, well, what are the options to reduce these emissions? If you look into business travel, maybe you can decide a corporate to reduce traveling needs, to use other modes of transport, to choose the most efficient airline, to choose to book an economy seat rather than business. But there are no many options out there apart from this. The corporate cannot ask an airline to buy a more efficient aircraft for the traveling of their employees. And if you look into the transportation and distribution, there are even less, because you cannot select, for example, the seat, or you cannot decide to use less logistic services, those that you need both upstream or downstream. So there is again the recognition that there is a need for this SAF, and these corporates want to get part of this. And also there is the recognition that this, from the very front, we need what is called the book and claim system, where the environmental attributes of this SAF are completely decoupled from the physical supply. That means that the entity, in this case the corporate that will be paying for the SAF, will be able to claim the benefits without demonstrating the actual use of the SAF. First of all, because they don't have aircrafts, therefore, and also because these employees, for example, might be flying from airports where this fuel is not supplied. So this is very similar to what it happens with the electricity sector, where the green electricity producer books the electricity that has produced through solar or wind, but then it is the consumer who claims, because it's the one that it has paid for that green electricity, for such green electricity, without demonstrating the actual use. That payer, that customer, or that corporate is not using actually the green electricity. So this is the concept of book and claim, that it can also happen between airlines and all the industry. It's also looking into this to make it more easier to demonstrate the use of the benefits from the use of SAF. If you move on. So in general, there are many initiatives, many programs, and you see that, well, corporates can either get a compromise through a specific uptake for a specific volume of SAF, or they can do it for a certain period of time. And these commitments can be directly with the fuel provider, or it can also be with the airline. And it can be through other platforms that, as I can show you in some examples that I have been searching for. But in either on the way, you have to understand that right now there is no standardized guidance on how to account for the use of SAF within these programs, because this is not endorsed by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. So the accounting of the use of SAF and the benefits right now, it's dependent on each initiative. For example, the Science-Based Target Initiatives already provides a guidance on how they allow for the use of SAF towards the claim under the scope 3 of these corporates. However, they say, look, what we don't accept is the use of any SAF credit or certificate that can be traded like in a market, in the carbon market or through any platform. Why? Because these have not been endorsed yet by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and the Science-Based Target Initiative relies mainly on this protocol for the methodologies on how to accounting for the emissions under all the scopes. So this is something that you have to be aware of. Right now, there is not a clear answer on how this will function, because It's true that more and more, and I also believe that in order to scale up this SAF market, we need that kind of virtual certificate. The approach to follow, it will be very similar as that it happens, for example, with the energy attribute certificate, that it works in the US. It will follow also the same approach as the guarantees of origin in the EU or the IREX in Asia, in Africa, and in South America. But this requires the actual creation of this certificate. How to control, who will be like the governance entity to control this, and what is more important, what will be the registry under which SAF certificates will be tracked, as it happens now with the registries under the offsetting programs. As you know, in CORSIA, for airlines to demonstrate compliance with their offsetting requirements, they have to use offsets that come from approved standards that they have their own registry. Why? Because they have proved to ICAO how good they are to ensure that you can follow the chain of custody of that offsets from the creation to the final cancellation and claim. So something will have to happen with these SAF credits. And right now, there is no internationally recognized, as far as I know, of registry. But that's why companies and, well, initiatives like the World Economic Forum, and there is another one, COSAFA, these are the two that I'm aware of, are really pushing and working on how to make this happen, to have this unit tradable in the market as something similar, as I said, as it happens in EU with the guarantees of origin with the electricity sector. And there are many uncertain also questions to be solved yet. And one that is key, and from my point of view, is how to avoid the double claiming issue, and also what the interlink will be between the claim of the benefits of SAFs under any voluntary initiative and the claim of the use of SAF, that it can be done under a regulatory framework, as it can happen, for example, with the CORSIA, with the UETS, how these SAF certificates could somehow interplay with other regulations, like the mandates in the EU. If there is a mandate for fuel suppliers to produce SAF and to put it into airports available in the airlines, how this potential existence of this SAF credit will be accounted for and claimed. These are kind of questions that I of course do not have a clear answer, because they still have to be clarified by all the stakeholders involved. But for you to know that this is going on, and also it's moving in a quite fast manner. So if you move on, Ralph. And this is like, well, a list of examples of programs where SAF is available for corporates to account towards their Scope 3 emissions. Please do not consider this as an exhaustive list. This is based on my low knowledge and research that I've done. So there might be others. These are just examples for you. In the presentation that you will receive, you have access to each of the programs where you can see. These programs can be offered by fuel suppliers, as it happens with the Sky Energy Burnout program, or it can be offered by fuel producers themselves, like it happens with Neste. Many of these programs are directly offered by the airlines themselves, so KLM, and in Japan, Qatar, JetBlue. So they look for a clear demand from the corporates they work with to be key on this scale up and to provide the, let's say, enough proof for these corporates that the environmental benefit from that SAF is ensured through improvement of the sustainability criteria, etc. So it is the corporate that claims for that benefit towards their Scope 3. And there are other platforms appearing now, like Sava and Avelia. Sava, as far as I understand, it's a program that enables several SAF suppliers to sell directly the SAF to corporates or to the cargo transport end consumers. I don't know many details about this program, but just
Africa, I think Sava for Sustainable Aviation Buyers Alliance, right? I think it's not really visible in the presentation, but it stands for Sustainable Aviation Buyers Alliance, right?
Buyers, exactly. So it's a platform to put, as far as I understand, several fuel suppliers available for those that can be interested in buying the SAF. And for example, Avelia has been developed by Shell, Accenture, and American Express, and it works with blockchain. Again, the way it actually works, it will be better than someone working in Avelia can explain that for you to understand that there are several platforms, initiatives, and programs that are trying to engage with these corporates to help this scale up. And at the end, to pay for the premium that is needed and that in most of the cases cannot be fully covered by the airline, either because they don't have a strong and clear need under these market-based mechanisms. Just to put you an example, in the EU ETS, there is a report attached to the refuel proposal that it says that it will have to be the carbon allowance at 160 euros to make an airline interested in going into SAF to claim such use under that scheme. In CORSIA, I don't know what the price of the carbon offset will be interesting for an airline to decide to go into SAF instead of buying carbon offsets. And right now, we know that the carbon offsets that are eligible for CORSIA are really far away for that cost of, for example, 160 euros under the EU ETS. So these are the reasons why there is a strong understanding and clear views that we need these corporates to get into the picture and for them to pay for this gap price. So these are the examples of programs that are out there. For example, the KLM corporate was, as far as I remember, the program under which Microsoft committed to a specific volume of SAF, and it has been Microsoft claiming the environmental benefits and emission savings from the use of that SAF from KLM, from the airports that they were supplying that fuel, in their scope 3 emissions. It was Microsoft claiming for that benefit. And if you look into Katai and Anana, you see how they are helping corporates to be part of these schemes and to help the scale up. At the end, it's just programs to help the scale up. So as long as these programs just rely on the voluntary air arena, okay, the problem comes when you get into how the interconnection will be of these claims that corporates are doing on a purely voluntary basis and the claims that, for example, the airlines will be doing just focus on their scope 1. Because as you know, when you look into the mandatory report monitoring and reporting emissions from an airlines, they just limit to their scope 1. These are the aircrafts that they own and that they have to pay for. So both EU ETS and CORSIA, for example, they just focus on fuel combustion, and that happens in scope 1, which are the aircrafts that they have. So I hope that this provides a general overview of this topic. I'm not an expert on accounting of SAF benefits under the Kyoto Protocol, nor under these initiatives that, as I told you, each of them relies on different accounting methods. But I hope that at least this provides you with a general overview of what is going on. And of course, from EASA projects, we will keep an eye to be in line and to know what is going on, because it's key to not limit our views on what is happening from a purely aviation point of view, airlines and aviation stakeholders, but those who have an important role in the overall picture, because they are important users of these aviation services. Now the most challenging thing to look into the questions.
Ralph, thanks a lot, Africa. Before giving you, Ralph, the control of the questions and answers, I think it was good also for me as project manager to thanks Africa, and also to drop kind of a disclaimer that it sounds a bit strange, but it's to make sure that everybody online understand that obviously the overview provided by Africa reflects on the ongoing situation, on things that are obviously they are happening in different parts of the world with different initiatives, and are not necessarily reflecting obviously the support of the European Union or the European Union organizations involved. I think it's providing a very good picture without, let's say, putting or positioning any of the parties involved in supporting or not supporting the different initiatives that have been explained. I think it's quite interesting what is going on, and obviously it's for every organization to explore more, to see the possibilities, and to incentivize also this discussion, which is indeed the purpose of this webinar. So thanks a lot, Africa. It was really, really interesting. I see it created also quite a lot of interest in terms of questions. So please, Ralph. Thanks a lot. Ralph, please. You are still muted.
No, the voice should be back. So thanks a lot. Africa, I realized that you have also tracked some of the questions while you were presenting. Would you want me to read the questions, or would you do it by yourself?
I have all here.
See, there is also for the audience, there's the chance to upvote, say, okay, what are the questions that are most relevant to me? We have the highest interest, there's always just one vote for now, but first on the airlines and airports subject to scope 3 emissions questions, are they? And the other question was, can you explain the role and importance of registry for SAF? So
yeah, I have all. I can try to address all.
Please, then.
As long as I have an answer for them. So let me read from the first one to the last one. Okay, yeah, so first one, it's are airlines and airports subject to scope 3 emissions, then also benefiting from SAF in scope 1 and 3. When now I'm talking about only airlines, okay, airports is not an area of my expertise, but when it comes to airlines and mandatory reporting, it only limits to scope 1. So for example, under the UETS and CORSIA, as I said, the airline has the obligation to monitor and report emissions from combustion of fuel of their aircrafts. So then it's also benefiting from SAF in scope 1 and 3. Well, airlines can benefit from the use of SAF under this system, so they can reduce their payment obligation. So if you use SAF under the UETS, you surrender less carbon allowances because you report less emissions, whereas in the CORSIA, you report as all your fuel as normal fuel, even if you are using SAF, and then the environmental savings, the emission savings from the use of that SAF are accounted as a reduction of your offsetting requirements. That's the way it works. Now I don't see the questions. Yeah, here. So this is the way it works for airlines. Airports, I'm not the proper expert to talk about. So maybe when you, I think that you will have another session about airports facilitating the supply of SAF. So maybe this is something to be addressed there. I don't see the questions now.
This is correct, Africa. This is on the agenda. To involve also airlines to share their experiences and stuff. Exactly.
Exactly.
I come to that later. But we're trying to share the slide of questions on the screen. I hope you can still see them.
Yeah, I see 4. Yeah, so second one.
Okay, good.
So can you, no, go up. The one of the registries? No, then well, there was a question regarding the role of the registry. So right now there is no registry that tracks the creation of SAF certificates that demonstrate the environmental performance from the use of this SAF. So everything works more on a paper basis. When we talk about registries, we are talking about electronic platforms where units are traded as they happen in the offsetting market. So for example, in the offsetting market, from the project developer, as long as it creates offsets because they demonstrate that they have reduced emissions compared to the baseline thanks to their project, certified under a specific standard, which has a registry. In that registry, that project developer it's the owner of these offsets that it puts and it offers to everyone that can be interested in buying in that offset. Interested parties for that offset, that certificate, and this is exactly the same as, for example, in the electricity sector with guarantees of origin, that unit can go from hands to hands to another hands to another hands, and you properly track the ownership. But the claim, it's only done when you demonstrate that you cancel that offset. So something similar will happen with the SAF. The SAF certificate that demonstrates the environmental benefits and performance of that SAF will go from fuel supplier to an airline, and why not from that airline to the corporate, and maybe if the corporate is just interested in that certificate for speculation or investing, they resell again to another one. But you need a registry to properly track that ownership, and it will be only the one who cancels that who can claim towards their emissions reductions. And this comes, and it's more relevant when you are looking into the use of these kind of certificates in the compliance market and under a regulatory framework. If you are doing it on a voluntary market, then there is not such a need of that robust tracking system. That's why for CORSIA, ICAO has been looking into very much detail of which are the registries that really prove all these criteria applicable to the offsets that can be used towards a carbon offsetting requirements in CORSIA, because it's compliance. So I hope that this clarifies, because right now there is no registry, okay, for the tracking of these certificates. The World Economic Forum is looking into this. I heard the stockholding event from a Sky Energy presentation, if I remember well, that they are expecting some guidelines in this regard for September or maybe a little bit later. We will see, because I'm not aware. I don't know if they will provide more clear signals on how this registry could look like in the SAF sector. So airlines buy SAF and travelers buy SAF from the airlines. This reduces the airlines' claim of their emissions because part of the emissions was paid by Scope 3? No. No. So, well, in my view, this should not be the case. If it is the corporate claiming for an emission reduction under Scope 3, it shouldn't be claimed under by the airline under a compliance market. But these are the uncertain questions. Indeed, in the report from the World Economic Forum, this is the key example. How to avoid this double claiming issue and how to avoid this potential coexistence of different claimings under different scopes. And this is also something that we hope to have more clear idea based on this updated guidance from the World Economic Forum, and how to split. Because if there is a SAF recognition and there is a certificate, why not splitting the claim between two? Part under Scope 3 for the corporate and part for the airline under its Scope 1 under, for example, UETS or CORSIA. But these are still to clarify issues. So to avoid double counting for Scope 1, airlines should not offer travelers to fight the SAF used by the airline. Exactly. To be honest, I don't know very much in detail how the airlines under these programs are ensuring that this is not happening. But also, as you know, the claim of SAF under these Scope 1 regulatory frameworks in CORSIA has not happened yet, because nobody is reporting use of CORSIA eligible fuels, because right now there are no offsetting requirements still there. And in the UETS that has been available for years, it has been very limited, again, because from an administrative point of view, sometimes it's more complex to do so than the reduction that you get in terms of lower and less carbon allowances to surrender. But in my view, no, they should not. They should do it together in a way to split that benefit, but not to account for the two. That's my view. What is the... What is the interest of private society in considering scope 3? Well, because it has demonstrated that these are indirect emissions related to the overall value chains that are not in the scope 1 and 2, and it's demonstrated that in many cases this is the biggest part of the company. And for example, we have seen it with Airbus. Airbus is not as an airline, but as a overall corporate. They have submitted targets for validation under the Science-Based Target Initiative, and they have committed to reduce emissions not only in scope 1 and 2, but also in 3. Airbus has no obligation to do so, but they are willing to do so because they consider that scope 3 emissions from their overall emissions footprint is very relevant. So this is, and also to go into net zero targets, this is something that is being requested to all corporates to not only focus on scope 1 and 2, but also to look into 3. But right now there is no mandatory scheme where you have to include these emissions. I mean, from a regulatory point of view, like carbon market-based mechanisms, okay? And most of these corporates do not have an obligation under any similar regulation to report and reduce emissions, as airlines have, or other installations under the ETS, or in the case of airlines under CORSIA. So airlines by SAF and travelers by SAF and this radio. No, we already talked about that. Can you move up? So for book and claim, airlines can claim. Well, I mean the last one right now. For book and claim, airlines can claim scope 1, while corporates can claim scope 3. How do we ensure it won't double counting? Well, I think that we have talked about this. This is one of the uncertain things. Yeah, and again, it's more important if you look into how this claim in scope 1 happens under a regulatory framework. If it's just a claim under voluntary initiative, then, well, still the issue is there, but the real problem comes when you look into compliance and voluntary initiatives. And, well, how much cost oil producer need to certify their SAF to be used in CORSIA scheme? Is this one-time certification for each type of SAF? This is not, Ralph, if you want, we can take note, or Monica, take note of these questions and look for a colleague in EASA who might be in a better position to provide an answer on this, because I personally don't know what the cost it is. I know that it has been very complex, and as far as I heard, it has been Neste, the one who has certified from the first time, who has managed to certify under the sustainability.
Africa, this is not a first question. I think we had this with Andrea the last time as well, Andrea Busa, and he was also taking a deep breath, because first of all, it's not only the amount to what I remember, it is also the timing. You don't know exactly how long it takes. It can take
a lot.
I can't remember. In the end, Andrea was even making a statement on amounts. I don't know what it was, whether it was 5,000 or 10,000 euros. I don't remember. Or he said it was 6 months to 2 years. I don't think there's a black and white answer. Just a rough estimate. I will try to follow it up and revert back to that.
Okay. Yes. So yeah, what is clear is that it's not easy, and things that are not easy, they are never cheap. Yeah. They are costly.
Indeed.
Then the question about the actual cost, we don't know, but it's true that it has been a quite challenging thing to achieve by Neste. That's at least what they presented. Yeah.
Africa, I think this is one of the last questions. I think we have been really almost spot on in terms of timing, considering we have started. I think it was approximately 5 minutes delay. So I think we are almost really on the spot now in terms of timing. But I don't want to cut anything off. Do you see any relevant question that we should touch upon again here, or are the main informations shared? I hope so. Let me address to the audience that we are recording this session, and we are going to share it as soon as possible on our project website, including the material. Let me, by starting to almost turning into the final words here of today. But again, I said I don't want to cut off any discussions here, Africa. Please give me the green light for ending this forum today.
I give you the green light.
Thank you. And Africa, thank you very much for your time. Thanks to the audience again for donating the time, for the interest. This is what makes this project become alive, to make it really working. And we are not stopping here. We have still, as Monica, as Africa already mentioned, we are preparing in the pipeline 4 more activities sessions. One is airlines experiences on SAF, SAF sustainability certification schemes, the role of the airport as a SAF hub, and talking about environmental reporting. That can still be subject to changes, but this is what we're working on at the moment to provide you with follow-up sessions over the next couple of months. So let me ask you again to stay tuned, and thanks a lot for your patience, and sorry for the technical hiccups in the beginning. So,
Thank you
Rebecca,
very much.
thanks also for being with us.
Of course.
Just back from vacation. Huh?
Yeah, just back from vacation. So, and also please watch our project website where we will post all the presentations and updates on the upcoming sessions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.